I personally would say Marouane Fellaini was a better player than Kevin de Bruyne.
Derbies are always horrible.
He should never play for Manchester United ever again.
Welcome back to the Sportsman Untitled. This is a Manchester Derby special, and I'm joined by, in the red corner we've got Statman Dave, and in the blue corner we've got Joe from CityXtra. They'll be joining us. We're talking all things Manchester Derby, maybe a bit of England chat in there, talking about the injuries, talking about the managers, and we're going to be having everything covered ahead of a big Manchester Derby this weekend, so stay tuned. And make sure you like and subscribe. Right, lads, looking back at last weekend's results ahead of a big Manchester Derby next weekend, obviously Manchester City getting a 1-0 win, quite a comfy win against Bournemouth away, 4 wins in the last 5. This is the sort of stage of the season where City might get their last losses of the season. We've seen it before. Does that maybe feel like something that they need to avoid next weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. We're at the point where it gets into... City fans have kind of got used to the idea now of like February. The back end of February is the beginning of like title run season, basically. It gets to the point where we start to win games sort of routinely, a bit like almost in machine-like fashion at this stage, because there's usually a title race at the end of the season in sight, which is where we're at now. But for me and for a lot of other City fans as well, like the performances from the last 2 or 3 weeks haven't really looked much like we're in that gear yet. Sort of hoping that, which is annoying because obviously the March that we've got coming up is, we've got United, then we've got Liverpool, we've got Villa, Arsenal as well in that month. So it's a pretty horrific month to be going into with it not the best performance form. We've been doing enough to win. Obviously the Bournemouth game was a game where we had, we got an early lead, and Bournemouth in the second half really grew into it, and we didn't really match it. So it looked like, if anybody was likely to get a goal in that second half, it was probably Bournemouth. But obviously, another part of that is 3 points are 3 points. So you'll just kind of take whatever you get, no matter how you get it. But yeah, considering that this is the stage of the season where, especially with the teams that we have coming up to play, we really need to be in that kind of just winning form. We're not really seeing the performances yet that are making City fans sort of think, yeah, right, this is it now. So you get to a point where City fans can look at a title race and start to believe that they're the favourites to win it. And maybe we can believe we're favourites to win it just because we have the track record of doing so. But if you were just to look at it based purely on performances right now, especially, coming off the Chelsea result, coming off Brentford and Bournemouth, where we've, across those 3 games, we've only scored 3 goals, whilst Arsenal and Liverpool are pretty free-flowing. We're not looking like vintage title run City at the moment, but hopefully in the next sort of few games we can, particularly starting at the weekend, we can get to that stage.
So the kind of performances that you're speaking of kind of finding the groove under Pep Guardiola, and obviously that happens every season. Is that kind of symptomatic of the 2 1-0 wins in a row? Brentford is a team you come and stuck against last year, home and away, and then going away to Bournemouth can be quite tricky. A lot of clubs have not got results there. Is it just kind of, where are the goals kind of coming from?
That's the thing. Obviously, we've got this massive Norwegian striker who's pretty decent, who normally a lot of the goals tend to come through, but at the moment, since he's come back from this injury, he's obviously still had his goals. I think if you were to look at his goal to game ratio since his return from injury, you'd look at it and go, what's the problem? But he's in that... It's with Haaland, it can be a lot of the time, and it usually comes out pretty much every single game that Haaland plays, that he ends up with like the least number of touches on the pitch, just because of the striker he is and the way that he plays. But that's usually fine if he's going to score a goal at the end of it, or facilitate someone else scoring a goal. But as you can see, to be fair, against Bournemouth, it was his shot that ultimately led to Foden getting a tap in after it came off the keeper. So, he's still contributing. It's not like we're looking at it thinking, oh God, like Haaland's woefully out of form or anything like that. But he doesn't look like that. He doesn't look like that sort of like ultra confident, assured self that he normally is. Like you'll see him go through on goal like at points last season. He's just like, this is in, before he's even got anywhere near the penalty area. Whereas at the moment, it's kind of looking like he's just missing this season. He's just missing so many more chances than I saw him miss across the whole of last season. Like even before his injury, he went through a 3 or 4 game period, even where like I think Sheffield earlier in the season was a particular one where he missed several chances to score, and when he did get that headed goal right at the end of the game, he looked relieved because he knew he should have had 3 or 4 before that, and that's kind of the position we're in at the moment with Foden. Obviously, Alvarez's form has dropped off a bit as well, sort of playing as that kind of second striker behind him kind of role. So we're looking at Foden now as being our guy to the creative spark for the whole team, as well as a bit of the biggest goal threat, which over the last 2 to 3 months he definitely has been. But yeah, so it feels like Pep's kind of still working out the best combination of players to put on the pitch in which position. It's kind of it's one of the downsides to Pep having a squad full of players who he knows he can put almost anywhere on the pitch and know that they will put in a decent performance. But because of that, especially with the return of De Bruyne as well, he knows that Foden's played so well in the middle, but Pep's not really at the point yet where he trusts him and Foden both playing centrally together, because they both do things slightly in a way that mean that there's probably some boring tactical reason behind it, but they don't complement each other in a way that maybe De Bruyne and say Gundogan or Bernardo Silva do. So I think he's looking he's just basically still in that point where he's trying to work out the best combination of players to put there that will ultimately lead to a winning run, and hopefully the return of Jack Grealish playing out on the left and making that role sort of tightened up a little bit more, because Doku's not really been offering us what I think Pep wants from a left winger. So I think it's hopefully that will then lead to a bit more, once we see more consistent lineups, we'll hopefully see a bit more consistency in performance as well, and that'll be what we can hopefully ride until the end of the season.
I think that's been an issue with City, is that Haaland hasn't played at the level he played last season. It's as simple as that. He has been injured, I agree, and he's still Premier League top scorer, but he's not playing at the level he played at. If you look at his, any of the metrics, for example, expected goals minus goals, in his career he always overperforms. Always scores more goals than the chances he gets. This season he's underperforming the first time in his professional career. That's a slight worry. You look at the big chances he's missing this season, he's over 1.1 per game. Last season it was less than one a game. You add that to the fact that Kevin de Bruyne has been injured, who is the guy that creates everything for Man City. You look around the squad, Foden, Bernardo, Julian Alvarez, they're not anywhere near the same level as creativity as Kevin de Bruyne. You've got an underperforming striker and a lack of creativity in midfield at the moment. There is an issue for Manchester City. When you combine that with the fact that Arsenal have scored 40% of their goals in the last 7 Premier League games, they are flying at the moment going forward, and the goals are spread through the team. And that's where City have gone to from a tactical perspective versus that side that they'd have, 5 or 6 players that have 10 goals, 10 assists to an Erling Haaland. And you look at the City squad and there is question marks in there to what certain players bring in certain moments. And I kind of agree there's an issue between playing a Kevin De Bruyne with someone like a Phil Foden. Both players are quite forward, where you want someone that retains possession with a Kevin De Bruyne, because then you can have someone that's really open and the players retaining it. And City are in an interesting position, but saying that, the game this weekend is the perfect game for them to score goals. It's as simple as that. United concede so many chances that Haaland's going to have loads, Foden's going to have loads, and that could be the kickstart of their season.
Well, obviously, speaking about the amount of shots that Man United concede, there's no better time really for Erling Haaland to maybe refine some form. He obviously grabbed that hat-trick in his first Manchester derby quite famously, and we could be seeing scenes similar to it, especially considering, was it something like 20 plus shots in the last 5 games against Man United. It's very poor. And
so 100 in the last 5.
Yeah.
Only Sheffield United have conceded more shots on their goal.
It's not.
So either Andre
Onana
Onana has a 10 out of 10 performance, or Man United get beat 5-6-0.
It's not good viewing for Man United fans. But as a City fan, do you feel a bit happy about that now?
I was going to say, if I had to pick between Onana having a 10 out of 10 or us winning 6-0, I know which one's more likely out of the two at the moment. I think it's derbies are always horrible, even though we go into them as nowadays we go into them as like absolute firm favourites, because for the obvious reasons about United's current situation, and like really...
How are they horrible then? You're going in as ultimate favourites. You've just won the treble. You've got the best striker in European football. How is it a horrible Sunday?
Unfortunately, I have 20 years of life experience before these last 10 that have ingrained me with there. It's just they're never fun occasions until we get that first goal, and then then at that point, especially when you see. Certainly the ones we've seen in the last year or two in particular, like that first goal tends to be, I think back when it was say it was Fergie that was there, or obviously Fergie, but even like Mourinho's side, like if you got that first goal, you didn't necessarily then think, right, this game's done now. Whereas I think the last few times that we've played against United, that first goal has very much been the tone setter for the game. Like that first goal's gone in, and you've seen, like you can see it in the fans and the players as well. A lot of the time, like the heads just drop. Like it's like oh god, like how many is this going to be? And that's kind of where if we get an early goal, especially at the Etihad, then I think we could hopefully be looking at a pretty decent scoreline. But also just with the way that our form in front of goal is looking over the last few games. Like 3-3 is not good for a Pep Guardiola side. It could also be a case where we go in at half time and it's 0-0 and then it looks a bit ropey from that point on. But yeah, I think as Dave said, like the number of shots that United are conceding at the moment, like City have got to be looking at that and just thinking like, because I only saw the highlights of the Fulham game this weekend, but it's not like a team can concede a lot of shots, but ultimately lots of them can just be pot shots that they're happy to sort of restrict a team to because like they're well defensively set up. But shots are coming in from absolutely everywhere, and obviously Dave will be able to tell you a lot more about this than me. But like it feels a lot like teams are just wherever it's coming from, whether it's the left, the right, just through the middle. Like teams are creating so many chances against United that if you're a team that have the quality that Manchester City do, you've got to be sort of looking at that recent record and thinking, yeah, like we can. If there's any time for us to get our goal scoring form back, especially for someone like Erling Haaland who isn't going to be happy with his recent performances, you've got to be looking at A, the big occasion, and B, the current form of the team in that big occasion that you're coming up against, and thinking, right, this is where I can really get my shooting boots on.
Hold on, I've to slow down there. It was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer who had the great record against Man City. In fact, he's won more games against Pep Guardiola than any of Manchester United's managers in recent history. So Ole was the number one.
He was.
Just to reference that, not Jose Mourinho. Jose Mourinho had a pretty stinky record against Man City. And I think that's the only approach Manchester United could go with, is playing defensive and playing on the counter-attack. And United had a really good way against playing against Man City. They matched up with them really well. They played back fives at times. City couldn't deal with it. And that's been the issue in recent years under Erik Ten Hag, as he's so tactically inflexible to play his system that he wants to ingrain them to play. They play high, they play low, the space in midfield's massive. The idea against Man City is to sit deep. How many teams go to the Etihad, play a back five? Yeah, loads. So why don't Man United do it? They're not in a position to play their own way. But then the issue is they don't have any players. So you've got, 5 different problems of why there is issues for Manchester United. And maybe it's a day where you see someone like Anthony play as a left wing back in a back five. Maybe this is the first day to see him as a different player, because quite frankly, he's on the right hand side has been very poor for Manchester United. Is that an option? Maybe. But you have to change things. I think that's the big thing with United at the moment, is changing something to change the mentality of the players, because it's just been pathetic.
We'll get on to Man United's result against Fulham over the weekend, but speaking more about this weekend's derby, is it almost? We've seen the tale before, haven't we? Man United have been written off before they've even got on the coach to get to the ground, and maybe like Jose Mourinho in 2018 is probably one of the memories of maybe winning a Manchester derby when they really probably shouldn't have done, especially given the 2 goals in the first half and how that turned out. Is there any worry of that happening again? Are you kind of worried as a City fan? Are you hopeful as a United fan, maybe thinking that we've got, maybe as a United fan thinking we've got a track record of getting this done? Maybe it's a City fan thinking, we need to make sure that if you're going to get some first half goals, get 3 or 4. Don't be hanging around. Make sure you put them to the sword as soon as you can. Yeah,
at the moment, because it's not even just that in the last, obviously the goal scoring thing is kind of just our last few appearances. Like, it's not exactly like endemic throughout the entire season, but what definitely is our defensive record. Like, we've not looked anywhere near as solid at the back as we have in recent seasons, particularly last season, where we had it would feel like if we went 1 goal up, we were sorted. Then we wouldn't concede. Whereas now, I think we've conceded in pretty much every game for like the last couple of months. I think it's crazy just how many we are conceding. So it feels like when you have to really rack up the goals, because especially in a derby, like anything can happen. Like it's a cliche, but like that 2018 game was absolutely horrific for me. I was planning where I was gonna enter the pitch to pitch invade at halftime, and then Pogba had his one good game in United shirt, and it was game over. And Sanchez, God, it was awful. So I think. From a City point of view, like, I think they've really got to sort of try and, if the opportunities are there, like, they've got to take them, because we probably will concede. Like, that's just how I go into most City games now. Like, we can't really, obviously we've won the last couple 1-0, which honestly those 2 clean sheets I'm hoping have done the team some they've given a bit of confidence at the back. But even with those clean sheets, like, we're still giving up chances. Like, it's not like it's a case of we're having a really solid game where we've only let them have like 1 or 2 shots. Like Bournemouth could have scored like quite late on last weekend. Ederson's had to make a couple of good saves. He had to do the same thing against Brentford as well. Like, we're not looking at our absolute vintage best at the moment, but you would still hope that is, enough to put away current Manchester United at the moment. Especially for me, the loss of Højlund for Manchester United as well is like pretty, given the form that he was in before he got this injury, is pretty massive. Because if you were going to think about anything going the other way, a striker like Højlund who's banging form with this sort of pace and ability to sort of get in behind the back is like, yeah, that would not be fun to play against at the moment. But from a City point of view, it's just score more than one, please. And that might make me feel a little bit more comfortable.
Business as usual, sort of. Well, moving on to United's defeat to Fulham on Saturday. The word disgrace was bandied around online. And it was not certainly far from a usual United loss so far this season. It seemed that despite getting that late goal, they still go on and lose it. Maybe a bit of naiveness with some of the players on the field. Maybe Christian Eriksen was used as maybe a bit of a scapegoat coming on for Casemiro, and Ten Hag saying that changed the game. Has Ten Hag now lost the chance at the top four? Because now there's a lot of big games coming in March, just like Man City's schedule. United have still got to play the top three. Is this perhaps maybe he's losing the top four week by week, and is it eventually going to be the end of his job?
The issue you got is the players, the injuries, and it changes everything. United's first team is a really good football team. What we've got right now is different from that, and that's the problem. Then when you lose Rasmus Højlund, as mentioned, his conversion rate is 60% in 2024. He's 5 games, just 6 goals, 2 assists. The guy was clinical, and United weren't creating him that many chances. The issue with Manchester United is very similar. Like, the weekend's not a shock. The weekend is how we've played most of the season, where we don't create a lot. We don't link with the centre forward. Again, Man United didn't create a single chance from open play for Marcus Rashford. Played as the number 9. He received 19 passes in 90 minutes. As much as we talk about Haaland not touching the ball, it's because the system is fine. You can allow that. You can be the poacher. You can play as a goal scorer. Manchester United and Erik Ten Hag, and what Ten Hag has done previously with Dusan Tadic or Sebastian Haller, balls into feet, playing off the centre forward, getting through the foot. United just don't do that. And that's a real problem with their style and setup. From a defensive perspective, they're far too open in their pressing. The structure's really poor. There's too much space in between the lines. They're obviously playing Rafael Varane and Maguire. You've got to sit deeper. Well, they haven't got to sit deeper. They do sit deeper. They could play high if they want. I'd rather see United concede goals where those two lose out of foot race than how they play, because at the moment you could play through United dead easy, and that is the massive, massive problem. But in terms of the top 4, yeah, it's probably gone now. That was you have to beat Bournemouth at home. You have to beat Fulham at home. You have to beat these teams at home if you want to be serious. At the same time, that game could have gone the other way, where Man United could have got another late winner. And it does come down to individual decision making of Eriksen, of Harry Maguire. They both could take the yellow card. Maguire will get sent off, yeah, cool. But you don't concede that goal. If United got a draw in that game, top 4 is probably still on. And I think that's going to be the difference. Instead of losing 3 points to Aston Villa, you lose 2 points to Aston Villa. And then consequently, you're closer. You build momentum. You don't lose. You're unbeaten. All these things really matter. But then you look at the substitution of bringing on Christian Eriksen. You're playing Kobe Mainoo and Christian Eriksen in midfield. There's no physicality there. That's a bad Premier League midfield. And that is the issue, that you had someone like Amrabat, who I think is a very good player. He hasn't had a chance. If you think about what he's played left back and right back more than he's played in defensive. He's a defensive midfielder. You look at his underlying statistics; they're actually really good. Progressing the ball when he plays for United, but he's not getting a look in. Why? Why is Amad not getting a look in? Amad Diallo is a talented footballer. 13 goals in the Championship last season with Sunderland is a really good return. Yet Fosun's getting started ahead of him. How does that? Why is that happening? Because again, you look at the performances. When Amad came on, he looked good. He had 10 minutes. That's the manager. That's no one else. That's the manager deciding that. That's the manager saying that we're playing a certain style. That's the manager dictating that. When you look at what Man United are becoming, or what they want to become and be transitional, that's what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was doing. So why are we 3 years down the line with X amount of money spent? Yeah, we're going back to the same thing that isn't the Manchester United way. Manchester United traditionally play attacking football with wingers. That's what they're defined as. They're not a counter-attacking team. They never have been. They've been very good on the break. You wouldn't describe Liverpool as a counter-attacking team. Liverpool are brilliant on the break. But that's where there's a humongous issue between what Man United are, what they become, and obviously that's going to change soon with Dan Ashworth, with whoever going to bring in the director of football level or the recruitment level. Has to be improvement, but at the moment, at the end of the season, like Ten Hag doesn't really have the right to have another season at Manchester United. There isn't enough. This season's been awful. The football's been terrible. And that's the first thing that Erik Ten Hag should have come and identified and sorted out. We keep saying the same thing, keeps coming out to the same problems. They don't press well, they don't play out the back well, they don't score goals, they don't create consistent chances. The injuries, there has to be something that have to look inward about the injuries because it's all muscular.
Yeah, they've got a lot of... Obviously, they're probably not the most injured team in the league, but the fact that it's a recurring injury...
No, they definitely will be up there with the top teams in the league in terms of injuries. And if you look at muscle injuries, they'll probably be the top one. Yeah. And that comes down to training, that comes down to what you're doing. Like, why are you running really hard in training? You should be doing tactical stuff, you should be doing, in terms of the sessions really need to be planned. And United don't have that. So that's why they're falling behind.
Do you think that, obviously, Ratcliffe did his interview last week talking about the club and his vision and everything like that. Do you think the fact that he seemed quite open, like quite an open book when being asked about a lot of things, even the Mason Greenwood situation, he was willing to put his hat and his opinion in sort of that whole situation. But when he was asked about Ten Hag, it was a bit like, well, that's not my. Do you think that is basically proof that he's not?
It's not his job. Why is he saying? Why is he doing an interview? Doesn't need to do it. Doesn't need to do these things. If he wants Man United to be back to where they are, Man United has become very egotistical over the years. So he needs to move away from that. From a leadership perspective, you should take a step back and do the stuff in the scenes and not doing it. Why are you doing an interview? It's not about you, it's about the club. Yeah. Which is an important thing.
Did it sort of annoy you hearing him talk about maybe some of the things that obviously require attention from fans and the public like to know these things about new stadiums and stuff. But is it a bit maybe this is off-season talk, maybe this is what you're doing, maybe a letter to the fans?
Yeah, probably. The timing. But evidently Manchester United are a very poor run club where nobody's going to give him honest feedback and say that to him. Yeah. That this is not the time to do this. This isn't about you right now. This is about getting in the right structure in the background and taking a step back. It's not about what you've done, what you've achieved. It's about the football club. And that's really important. Without someone saying to him, like, are we doing this at the right time? Are we filming this in the right way? Is this the right person? Should we be addressing things about certain players that should never play for the football club ever again? And I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to give the guy any validation. He should never play for Manchester United ever again. And that's something that's not a conversation. That's about the club. That's about morality. That's about what Man United should be as a football institution. So talking about those things and then also aiming things at Man City and Liverpool, and we're just not in the position to do that, seems a bit strange. You should be looking inward. We should be looking at what they're doing inside, which they are doing in the background. Talk about that. Absolutely fantastic. But that should be the focus. Like, talk more about building an academy stadium at Old Trafford, improving Old Trafford, investing in those areas, which should have happened 10, 15 years ago. But don't be outward looking. We should be looking inside at the moment from a philosophical perspective.
One thing that might end up on Sir Jim Ratcliffe's agenda over the summer is there is a very high chance that he will have to look for a new manager, and he will probably be assigning people to be involved in that process. Obviously, United will not be alone. They've got Liverpool and they've got Bayern and they've got Barca to contend with. That's three jobs that probably look a bit... those seats are a bit cushier than the ones at Old Trafford.
I wouldn't say Barcelona. No chance. Barcelona is an absolute mess of a football club.
Financially, I would agree.
If Xavi takes a step back from Barcelona, you would really, really consider why that's happening. And I think that... So I'd put Barcelona below Manchester United in terms of it. Barca... They're a club that are in transition. They've got no money to spend. They've got loads of really good young players. It could be a really nice job, but at the same time, you look at it in a way where you're like, why? Why has Xavi, of all people, decided to leave? Bayern Munich's a great job, always is. They're still, from a board level perspective, is a little bit up in the air at the moment. They're sorting out new board members coming in. They're getting a new director of football that's going to come in. But again, player power there is a big problem. Like Julian Nagelsmann is one of the best managers or coaches in the world. He's very, very young. They should have stuck with him and got rid of some of the older players. There's players in that team, Goretzka, Kimmich, that are nowhere near playing the level. Kimmich is a really, really, really good right back. I think he's an okay central midfield. I think he's got quality in central midfield, but he's a really good right back. He spent the last few seasons playing central midfield, moved to right back at the weekend, looked fantastic. But that's what you've got to set the tone. And players like, I love Thomas Muller, one of my favourite players, but is it time for him to move him on? From a leadership perspective. So Bayern have got a lot of question marks. Liverpool, you're coming after Jurgen Klopp. It's going to be the hardest job in the last,
It's probably since Fergie retired.
20 years? Yeah, probably since Fergie retired, to take that. Manchester United is a mess, but there's a new system in place. So that's what you've got to look at, all these different intricate facts and when looking at the roles. But I do think, I would say Bayern would be number 1, Liverpool would be number 2, Man United number 3, Barcelona number 4. At the same time, you probably want different managers than Liverpool and Bayern. Manchester United would never hire Xabi Alonso, or should never hire Xabi Alonso, because he played for Liverpool. And that should be part of the mentality. Shouldn't be interested in that. Of course, you can get executives that have been at other clubs and good executives, but
very, very good aspiring CEOs, I've heard.
Good CEOs, but at the same time, you shouldn't be signing a former player that's won the Champions League at that club. That doesn't make sense to me. And rule out the manager's search. So these are the best ones, which Bayern and Liverpool are going to be fighting for. So United have got that next, the next manager there. Amorim, Nagelsmann. Potter's obviously very close to Ineos, who is a good manager. I think we forget he's a really good manager. I think you look at Brighton this season, and they've looked defensively a lot more open. You've got to give Potter, in the start of last season, 7th in the league when he left. 7th. He started that phase of De Zerbiism and so forth, and De Zerbi's a brilliant manager as well, but Potter deserves some credit there. Won't be your number 1 choice, but he'd be in and around there as someone that's a development coach. Big thing with what United players need is they need coaching. That's it.
A big question from upstairs. We like to get the other members of staff at the Sportsman and Betfred involved, and get some of their questions. And the first one that came to us today was: is Kevin de Bruyne better than any Man United midfielder in the history of the Premier League? That is a huge question with possibly 100 answers. But we'll start with you, Joe.
Well, I'm obviously going to say yes, because I just think that it's one of them where I don't think that no matter who you support or what you sort of like, in the same way that I can't argue that, say, someone like a Roy Keane or someone like that is definitely in the conversation. I don't think anyone can say that Kevin de Bruyne is not in that conversation for the sort of best midfielder in the league. I just think his assists and the sort of the creativity that he brings to City is just. It's one of the best team that the Premier League's ever seen, or one of them, is just on another level. I think it's crazy the sort of since he's come back from his injury as well, where I was very worried about what he'd look like after that injury, because obviously the kind of injury it was, where he's had to have surgery on his hamstring. A lot of players could come back from that and look physically very different. And to be fair, I think I imagine if you put him in a foot race with someone else, he's probably lost a yard of pace or something like that. But I think the way that he's adapted to sort of be a bit slower and a bit more careful with the way that he plays, but ultimately still being able to play that ridiculous pass into Haaland or Foden or any of the other attackers in a way that nobody else on the pitch can is just mad. And I think that, obviously with the exception of the 2019 title win where he was injured for most of that season as well, I think every season that we have won the league outside of that, he's been probably top. He's probably been our best player in each of those years, with the exception of obviously maybe last year where I'd say it was probably Rodri. But he's also won multiple Player of the Year awards and stuff like that as well while he's been here. Obviously, those individual awards for me don't really count much in terms of saying whether someone's the greatest player or not. But for me, it's just the eye test of just watching him every week. He does so much. His all-round game is just brilliant in a way that I don't think I've seen from many midfielders in the Premier League. Full stop. But obviously, I have the bias of being a City fan as well, so I'm obviously going to say that City are the best. But obviously, you can still look at. I'm sure you'll probably be able to rattle off 2, 3, maybe even 4 names from United's time over the peak Fergie years who you would put on a similar level. But I think, for me, if of all the midfielders that City have had over this last few years, obviously Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva, you're looking at probably Rodri coming up as the next one who you would look at and go, he's probably one of the best in his position, in the Premier League ever, if he keeps it up for another 3 or 4 years. But De Bruyne kind of stands out above the rest of them for me.
Happy day. Well, maybe looking at De Bruyne, there's some talk this morning about what he wants to do towards the end of his career. He's thinking about potentially retiring at City, signing a new contract extension. I think 2025 was mentioned as maybe that's when it's going to get done, or maybe that's like the crunch year when it comes down to it. Could you see his role changing? Because obviously he's getting older. That injury has taken somewhat of a toll, because it will with every player. Could he become maybe the super sub? Like I remember watching when he came back against Newcastle. He sort of played 25 minutes, and that lovely ball over the top to Oscar Bob, and he got around the keeper and finished beautifully. That can be sort of a permanent fixture within City, where he will always be on the bench, maybe in those big games where it's on a knife edge and you need a winner. He can be that guy. Do you think maybe he can fill that gap?
I think he definitely can when he gets to... I think at the moment he's still got the physicality to play like 90 minutes from the start. Obviously, we've seen him get rested for the last couple, because obviously the nature of his injury, he's not going to go straight back into 90 every week. And I think that he's been held back with the sort of view of this next month of fixtures we've got coming up as being a starter for those games. But, you know, when it gets to the point where maybe his legs have gone a little bit, or maybe it's just he's not capable of doing a 90 minutes anymore, I think he, as part of those plans that you mentioned there, he said he wants to retire at City if he can, or at least that was pre a couple of bids from Saudi anyway. That was his plan, and I'm not. I personally don't think that it'll be swayed by Saudi coming in, but that's the kind of discussion that's being had at the moment. I think that if he does stay until he retires, and it gets to a point where he does have to maybe sit a little bit deeper, so he does a little bit less running, or like say just be that guy who comes on for the last 25-30 minutes and changes the game. Fine, like we've seen that he's got the ability to do it, and I think that even when to be honest, when he comes on as a sub, I've watched him quite closely, because obviously when you see De Bruyne come back, you're gonna pay a bit more attention to him, but he actually spends a lot of his time not running. He'll pass the ball off to someone else, and he'll just kind of, in a way that a lot of people looked at. I think it was Messi who sort of does it for like, or did it sort of.
There's videos of Inter Miami saying you don't have to run and you can just stay in the field.
You'd see him for the first 10-15 minutes of the game just sort of stroll around the pitch and sort of work it out, and that's kind of what De Bruyne has been able to add to his game. Like he's just been able to he'll pass the ball off to someone and they'll just walk off into the right position, so that he's not just constantly burning himself out physically for the whole time. Because I think that's what he's realised. You know, he'll have been speaking to a lot of physiotherapists and a lot of sports scientists over the last 4 to 5 months while he's been injured, and they'll have been telling him you just got to adapt your game a little bit in the way that maybe someone like a Giggs or whoever did towards the back end of their career. Obviously, that wasn't brought on by injury; that's just aging. But when you get to a certain point of your career, you've got to realise that you can't just play at 100 miles an hour every game, which peak De Bruyne did, and that was like, you know. He'd play a whole game at 90 minutes and you'd still see him make a lung-busting run in the 90th minute, because he was capable of doing it. And I don't think necessarily his body is at the point where he is capable of doing that, even now. So I think when he gets to a point where he'll be 34, 35, then yeah, you could see him definitely be used in a role that's a lot less physically intense for him, but still allows him to do the ridiculous creative work that he does. Yeah.
Dave, you've got a chance to talk now. How do you feel about this sort of Kevin De Bruyne idea of him being up there above the... well, pretty much every Man United midfielder.
Well, it's rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, look at the Premier League, how many Premier League trophies Man United have won, and some key players in there. The evolution of those players as well. Kevin De Bruyne has not done that yet. You're looking at Paul Scholes, you're looking at Ryan Giggs, then you're looking at David Beckham, being players that played at an equal or higher level than Kevin De Bruyne, but did it consistently and won trophies. You know, Paul Scholes' example of more trophies, more Champions Leagues, but also the respect of basically every top player that's played in European football always talks about Paul Scholes. Paul Scholes was a really, really, really good player that grew and grew and grew, and technically, you know, so underrated. So you're looking at him, but you're looking at David Beckham. Should have won the Ballon d'Or in '99 if Man United's votes weren't split through the team. Unlike Barcelona, I think they had 2 players in the top 20, so all the votes were focused on 2 players, Rivaldo being one of them. He would have won the Ballon d'Or. He'd got the most assists in the Champions League that season with 11. His ability to dictate and change games. You think about where he came from that season as well, with all the hate after the '98 World Cup, then how he changed games in the Champions League knockout stages, the Inter Milans, the Juventuses, playing the final in central midfield. This player is a player that's of a great quality, arguably got better delivery than Kevin De Bruyne, which is incredible to say, but better delivery from set pieces. I think there's players that we forget about. David Beckham was one, Scholes was another, and again, Ryan Giggs in his evolution, you know, played in central midfield with Man United to get to a Champions League final. Very, very underrated in there. And then you kind of look at Roy Keane as well, and sheer leadership, different to Kevin De Bruyne, but you could argue that he carried United through seasons and games and titles and so forth. So I think the big thing is Kevin de Bruyne is up there, and that's the thing with this. It's not like they're miles away from each other. It's just that those players have finished their careers, so we can reflect on them in different ways. We might reflect on Kevin de Bruyne that way. We don't know what he's going to do in the next 2 years. We don't know the role he's going to take. And that's the interesting side of Kevin de Bruyne, is he is good enough to do that. And he's up there with those 4 players that I spoke about. He's technically as good, and it's about winning, I think. And then you can have that conversation as, which level did he get to? How many trophies did he win at Man City? Did he win a Ballon d'Or? And so forth. And then we can sit back and go, okay, cool, that was the better player. But it's all subjective, I think, at the end of the day. Because, I personally would say Marouane Fellaini was a better player than Kevin de Bruyne at Manchester United. He saved us so many times when we were really, really bad. You put Kevin de Bruyne in that team, is he going to be the same physical threat up front?
What's his chest control like? That's the real. That's the real question.
Watch them elbows, Kevin. Watch them elbows.
Is he good at elbowing people and jumping?
Well, you've certainly given us a fantastic clip there, Dave. Thank you very much. Sort of moving on from that, another question from upstairs is: how many teams are there in the Premier League that are currently coached worse than Man United? Because a lot of the talk has been, obviously, from yourself even today, Dave, talking about on the training ground not turning into results on the pitch. You see, I think it was last weekend before the Fulham game.
You see, I think there's a disconnect there.
Yeah,
I don't think Erik Ten Hag's a bad coach. I don't think I think he's a brilliant coach. You can't get Ajax to a Champions League semi-final and evolve that team and how he did without being a brilliant coach. The issue comes with the players. Do they understand the message? Do they get the message? Are they the right people to facilitate that role within the squad? That's the kind of issue, is that as much as Erik Ten Hag's has been lacklustre this season, the players that they've bought have been wrong. The players that are already there are wrong for his style. They've not been moved on, blah, 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 blah. So I think it's not directly his fault, is what I'd say, which, you look at someone like a Brighton, right, where the recruitment is unbelievable. So Potter, De Zerbi, they look better. Or Brentford, Thomas Frank looks great because they buy the right players for him. Man City, Pep gets the right players, and if they're not the right players, they go and buy another one. How many centre-backs have we seen? 200, nearly 300 million on centre-backs that have been binned. Mangalas, the Osamendi, that aren't right. And it's fine, you can move them on. And City have got the resource to do that, so it's not a bad thing, but City do that. Whereas Manchester United are stuck with X amount of players. So it's really difficult to directly judge what Erik Ten Hag is versus other managers because of the other parts of what it takes to become a manager and so forth. But, you could say there's some, Emery, for example, really well coached. But then you look at someone like Postecoglou, again, really well coached team, but not quite playing as the same level as they're playing at the start of the season. So it's really difficult to gauge a coach. So there's a lot of factors with it.
Do you think that part of being a good coach, though, is obviously there's the factor of they haven't necessarily bought players that are that suit Ten Hag in particular, although a couple of them have been his signings, and Anthony being probably the most. Obviously, Ten Hag didn't say pay this amount of money for him, but he was a player he wanted.
It's a stick to beat as well.
Yeah. I think. Do you think that a part of being a great coach is what I say a great coach, even like a top level coach, is being able to sort of work with what you've got to some degree when you come in? Because obviously Pep came into, obviously Pep, we're talking like Pep, who's like one of the best ever at this, but like he came into City's 16-17 squad, which was like the average age must have been like close to 30. Like he had Sagna and a 40-year-old Gal Clichy at left back and stuff like that, and had them playing this inverted wing back system, had them doing a lot of the. I don't think many of that entire team was there for more than 2 or 3 years after that, because they were just either old or just not good enough. But he still had them in that season playing a style that you could see was his, and like and building towards that next level. Whereas with what Ten Hag's doing, I don't look at it as. And you watch them more than me, so you'll know. But I don't see a style where I think that's what they can build on next year.
But last year they did, and that was the same year that Guardiola had City for the first year, where City arguably stunk loads of games out. They did. They had too much possession, not enough penetration, because the players were wrong. And that's the problem. That in that first season that Guardiola had, you could see it. You could see some things with that with the team last season. You don't win one trophy and get to another final without that. You don't get to the Champions League without that, where you have moments where they look really good. I think the issue is kind of what you said there, is we saw a bit last year. We probably saw more with Pep in terms of his identity. But then the year after, or the window after, they just didn't help. They've not helped themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas City got rid of all those old players,
signed like 7 or 8 players that went straight into the first 11.
So that is kind of the difference, and that's why it's quite difficult to really judge that side of things. It's still not been anywhere near the level of last year, even as a direct comparison. But if you do look at the signings and the players, like apparent over the summer, Man United needed 2 centre backs. Apparent they need a new left back. Some stuff that I said that people are like, what are you talking about? We're like 6 months into the season, and it is really apparent Man United need a left back, and that was apparent in the summer. Man United needed more defensive midfielders. That was apparent in the summer. Kobbie Mainoo coming in is like they've rolled the dice and they've got a 6. That's super lucky. That's not planned. It wasn't a plan for him to be there. So they needed to buy more midfielders. They needed 2 strikers. They needed an old striker and a young striker. It's evident. The squad needed it. Anthony Martial is garbage. It just doesn't... Unfortunately for him, he's just not at the level of what he should be. He doesn't score enough goals and get involved in the attack and play enough, and he can't defend. So that's...
Crucially, he's never fit either, so...
Well, yeah, it doesn't stretch, which is a big issue, which is questionable for a Premier League footballer. You combine all those things with what Ten Hag has had to deal with, and it's like a really, really bad... Then you throw in Ronaldo, you throw in Rafael Varane kicking off this year, you throw in signing a Casemiro, who is 33 years old now. They spent £60 million on him. There's like... It's difficult because I think Guardiola with this United team, with the injuries this season, they'd probably be better, but they wouldn't be that much better. Do you know? It's still like, Pep can't play a high line with Rafael Varane and Harry Maguire. He can't play one of those going into midfield. Not a chance. And that's kind of at fullback. Victor Lindelof's been playing left back. Nathan Ake is probably the best inverted fullback in the league in a sense of holds the line, makes the back free, really good defensively. Compare that to Victor Lindelof, who got burnt by Diaby and Bailey last week, got done by whoever this week against Fulham. There's issues with the squad. At the same time, there is a lot of teams that are coached better than the Man United at the moment. But it feels like United have got a lot of issues that
it's personnel, not
could mitigate it to a point.
Yeah.
And there is accountability. But there's also got to be ability for the player to learn. And that's the other side of player recruitment. If a player is an amazing footballer but can't learn or can't understand, then how can they be in a system? And that's Guardiola's got that down to a T with the players at City, is they're very intelligent from a football perspective, like John Stones, a prime example.
Yeah. It seems like he almost puts them on a bit of an apprenticeship, like Mateus Nunes is probably undergoing it at the moment, where they're not in the team every week, but they're sort of watching, they're learning, in training, they're probably getting picked up more than the other players there, but they're learning, aren't they?
But don't forget that there's players that don't learn and he gets rid of, and then City instantly recruit.
Yeah, but that's the sign of a good football club, really, isn't it? So there we go. So we'll move on from the coach and the personnel talk. Still similar on personnel, but we're going to focus a little bit on England now. Are you both avid England fans? Are you both getting involved in the Euros this summer?
Yeah, Euros football.
Like a tournament.
Yeah, tournament's good.
Tournaments are always great.
Yeah.
Now, looking at both teams, there's quite a lot of English lads that will be hopefully joining the squad for the Gareth Southgate this summer. But who do we think will be in the starting 11? I've got the list of the England players here now. So for City, there's Kyle Walker, John Stones, Rico Lewis has got a potential to get in as well, Jack Grealish, Phil Foden. For United, Harry Maguire, Luke Shaw if he's fit, Kobbie Mainoo if he gets the call up, Mason Mount. I mean, it's unlikely, but I'll put him in the list, and then obviously Marcus Rashford as well. Out of those group of players, who we seen in the starting 11 this summer?
I think Harry Maguire. I'm sort of just looking at the United sort of players first. Yeah. I would say Harry Maguire, and left back is kind of Shaw or Chilwell at the moment, isn't it? But I would like a fully fit Luke Shaw, if that's what we have going into the tournament, has every chance of starting at left back, I think. Harry Maguire, I actually really like him when he plays for England. I think he's a really solid centre-back for England. I think Gareth Southgate plays a system that just suits him really well. I think being next to John Stones, who's like a really sort of assured presence at centre-back as well, and kind of takes a lot of... Because I think at United, or certainly at his early time at United, Maguire was sort of signed to be this ball-playing centre-back, and it's like, a lot of it will go out from you. Whereas I think John Stones takes a lot of that pressure off him and sort of just makes his job a little bit easier. So I think those two you could look at from the United point of view of certainly being in the starting. I would think, unless you...
I don't know. I don't think I'd play Harry Maguire or Luke Shaw, to be quite honest, based on form this season, though. I don't think that's... international football's moving on from the days of it being like kind of fixed old managers that come in and play a certain, like there's styles and there's, you know, you think about how the development of certain teams over the last few years, the teams are actually a lot better than what they have been in the past. So with John Stones, I'd prefer playing more of a mobile centre-back with him. You know, Ezri Konsa this season's been brilliant for Villa. He's a player that's very flexible, that's played right back at times, that would be a good option. And I just think that pace would be quite helpful for England. Left back's a weird one. You know, Rico Lewis at the moment probably would be number one. Chilwell's form's iffy. Luke Shaw's injured at the moment. You need to have form going into the tournament. But then it'll be a lot of pressure on him as well. Marcus Rashford, if he gets a run of form, yeah, play him. I think this form started with England, didn't it? The World Cup. And he should have been played more, which I think is the biggest thing about tournaments is if you have a player that's in form, that's scoring off the bench, get him in the 11. You're only playing, like 10 plus games and you've won the tournament. So I'd say those. I think Phil Foden's definitely in there. Jack Grealish at the moment wouldn't be in there for me.
Yeah,
injuries.
He'd need a similar kind of, like you say about Rashford, he'd need a run into the build going into the tournament to be in the starting 11 for me.
I think when you look at attackers as well, like England have got, you know, the likes of Tony, the likes of Watkins, Kane. Is it worth England playing two forwards? Playing Kane off another striker? Because Ollie Watkins at the moment is probably the best striker in the Premier League by a comfortable mile.
I see he got the most goal involvements, I think I read yesterday.
Yeah.
Which
his numbers are ridiculous.
Yeah, and he's playing at that level. And he's moving off the ball exceedingly well. He's linking really, really well. And he looks like the last line type of player that England could use and would be, you know, get a run in the tournament, score goals. Tony would be a great option off the bench as a physical option. Why not play both of them? And then work the system around that. Maybe play Phil Foden wide. I know that, you know, the idea long term is for him to play central, but he's been playing quite well for City on the wing this season.
I feel like you could probably see Foden in the hole, maybe behind two strikers. If you're playing like a 4-3-1-2, but maybe it might be a lot of running for him to maybe make up for. But you know, if Harry Kane's going to drop deep with him, there's a lot of fluidity there. You know, Jude Bellingham's going to be.
But that's the problem. I think that's why Foden has to play wide because you've got to get Bellingham in the team as well.
Needs to be there, yeah.
So you know, how does your midfield look? You've also got Trent. Where does he play?
Yeah.
And you've got, you know, Declan Rice is already definitely going to be playing holding midfield. So it's kind of how you move the rest of the team on around it. But it very much should be on form. Like Ben White's a player that I'd have in the England squad in an absolute heartbeat. You know, him how he's evolved this season, where he's playing basically midfield for Arsenal at the moment. He's someone that I would probably start at right back to give the freedom. I'd like to see Trent in midfield, but it's how do you balance all these players in? Maybe playing Trent on the right wing, maybe playing, you know, Phil Foden on the left wing, playing a little bit more traditional with the two forwards that you're going to go with, but changing it and building something that's a little bit more creative, because I think that's the problem with England is...
it's like maybe a solution could be to utilise someone like Kyle Walker at City. You know, he's because of his pace, he can bail a lot of players out of trouble. And maybe if he's that inside centre back for the right back, where Trent will be playing, maybe that pace can bail out England a bit more.
And has he been that good?
No, not for me.
I think that's the problem.
Yeah. I think what Kyle Walker's, and this is why I don't really like him playing as like that centre back position for England, because I think Kyle Walker's defensive positioning can often be pretty suspect, which is why it's great that he has the insane athleticism that he does have, because when he's obviously with City, it's really different because this season in particular has been asked to play really high and wide on the right hand side, which is for someone who's got a cross as terrible as Kyle Walker is just so something I just do not understand. But it means that when he's doing that, he's obviously asked to do a lot of recovery runs backwards, which is what has made Kyle Walker one of the best right backs in the league for so long, because he can sort of cover anything that comes the other way like that. Like he's shut down like Mbappe and stuff like that, and Vinicius as well in his peak. But I just think that for England, if you're looking defensively, which is what he's going to be asked to do a lot more for England than the forward thinking stuff. Like he's on the ball, he's perfectly fine. He can play it inside to midfielders and stuff like that, and going forwards as well. But I just think defensively, he's just not been, for me, he's had too many brain farts in that right back position, that usually because of the position that he's in, if that happens to you as a right back, then they've got a left winger who's suddenly got a perfect opportunity to get a cross in. So I don't know. I mean, I suspect Southgate will probably play probably like a Trippier or something like that. I think Southgate's got his guys. Southgate's got his people who we don't want to see it, but I just think that same with Maguire as well. Like we can sit here and say that we would prefer someone else to play there, and I think going off form, like you say, we absolutely would.
Yeah.
I just think that Southgate has his guys, and I think that I think that a back four of Maguire, Stones, Walker or Trippier, and Luke Shaw or Chilwell on the left, whoever it is probably going to be what we see.
It just goes against everything that's happening in the Premier League.
Yeah.
Like City are playing 4 centre-backs, Arsenal are playing 4 centre-backs, Liverpool are very much playing Joe Gomez quite a lot recently.
Yeah.
That's the model. That is where teams are going, and England could do that. Levy Colwell could play left-back for England. And the idea wouldn't be for him to attack. The idea would for him to become a third centre-back in possession, having someone coming inside like Trent or Ben White. Like, that makes sense for England. That means you can force one of the midfield. You can play Bellingham low in defence and high in attack. And then you could play the shape that all the good teams in the Premier League play. And that's where England should go, because all the players don't require a lot of coaching because they do that for their club teams. And then you have a team that is actually attacking and flexible. And as well, with the big thing with international tournaments is set pieces are massive. 4 centre-backs. City have got one of the best records over the last 2 seasons from set pieces. Arsenal have scored the most goals from corners and set pieces this season. So you look at it and you think, should we not be applying that logic?
You'd think so. Obviously, maybe that's another reason to get someone like Ben White in. He's familiar with the system, and yeah, a lot of fantastic points about.
And just on Maino, I don't want Maino to go to the Euros because he needs a summer off. From a pure club perspective, there is no point taking. He needs a summer off. Needs to be able to develop and grow and have some time off.
Well, you've seen it many times before. Young players for England.
How many times? Theo Walcott, Wayne Rooney in that tournament where he's injured and they brought him back. Yeah. Like,
it is a common running theme. So moving on to the next point, and maybe a bit more back to the Manchester derby, kind of looking at those two teams. How much are injuries playing a part in both of the seasons? I know we sort of brushed on it before with what United is suffering. City, they've got a lot of people back in recent times, and it's almost like a fresh bill of health for almost the entire team at the moment. Is that really going to be vital for fighting on all fronts?
Yeah, we had against Copenhagen in our midweek fixture. We had, I think we had a full bill of health for all of 20 minutes until Jack Grealish picked up a groin injury and went off. I think for us, it's not the problem. The problem with City's injury list is it's not even that big. It's not really been that big over the course of the whole season. Really, it's just that the players who we are missing are pivotal players. Like John Stones has not had the same clean bill of health that he had last season, where it felt like going into the running, there were no concerns over John Stones at all, whereas obviously in previous seasons in his career, that very much has been one of the big concerns, is that he can't stay fit. But this season he's kind of back to being in and out of the squad again. Obviously the hope is that they're just managing his minutes, knowing that when it comes to the end of the season that they will be able to rely on him, hopefully. So having him in and out kind of has a massive impact on the way we play, because it looks like Akanji's the guy who's being asked to move into midfield instead of him, which he's fine, he's passable, but he's just another body in the centre of midfield that isn't 100% comfortable on the ball in the way that John Stones is, which can kind of lead to performances a bit like what we saw against Chelsea. We obviously had De Bruyne out for a long time, and obviously we still did perfectly well without him. We were in a couple of points of the title, even with him not being there for 4 months. But if he was there, how much better would we have been? Haaland out for 2 months, again, same thing. Like we can talk about obviously how he has still been ultimately underperforming his XG and missing big chances and stuff like that. But having that presence there in some games can be a massive help. And it's so I don't think we've ever really. You've obviously had other injuries as well. Like we've got Gvardiol out at the moment, who was playing pretty much every minute in the league up until the point that he did get that injury. Kovacic has been like in and out of fitness as well. But these are just sort of like players who the team can do without. It's more for me the fact that the injuries that we do have, whilst we're not exactly going through a massive injury crisis like some other teams, it's the fact that the 2 or 3 that are finding themselves out of the team are the 2 or 3 that I think a lot of City fans would put into their ideal starting 11 going into the last 2 or 3 months of the season. I think we'd all have. I'd like to think that most of us would have Jack Grealish playing on the left in a sort of kind of reminiscent of the running that got us to the treble last season. I'd want to see Grealish in there. I'd want to see Stones in there every week. I'd want to see Haaland up front every week. And obviously we're at the point where that Haaland is back now, but Grealish isn't. Stones is kind of just working his way back to being that consistent presence in defence again. But I'm not sat here saying that like injuries are the reason why City are where we are. We've done really well to cope without them because we've got very, very good players to replace the ones who do go out injured. Like it's not exactly it's not the end of the world that these players are out. It just means that we're seeing slightly less consistency in the performances that we would be if we had everybody fit. But I think you could probably say that about literally any team in the Premier League, really.
Well, we'll wrap this one up quickly. Looking at sort of the similarities in the profile of injuries, maybe I would compare Højlund and Grealish at the moment, of two players that need the games, really. It's because Grealish needs to prove himself on that left wing, and Højlund finding a fantastic vein of form, but as a striker, you're only as good as your last game, and if you're not playing, then things can turn bad for your team, and we're seeing it at United at the moment. How do you see United line up? Is it going to be a makeshift? Do you think maybe a change of tactics, or is it going to be a mishmash of what we've seen?
It'll just be a mismatch of the same stuff that we've seen in recent weeks. Nothing's changed in the last 5 weeks. Yeah. Really, we've had players come back, but overall it's very similar. I think that there are players that are quite impactful. Lisandro Martinez is a massive one. Having him versus City is better than not. Luke Shaw's the same, but then the striker is just is what it is, and that's United's own fault, and that's the difference between Manchester United and Man City. City have got the depth of quality of certain players, and maybe they're not hitting the lights that we saw of Gundogan or Riyad Mahrez, in there. Palmer's an interesting one, having seen what he's done at Chelsea this season. Obviously wanted to leave City, but was there a way they could have kept him there, because he would have been brilliant for City this season? I think on that right wing that could have been a position, but obviously Pep doesn't want to define players with positions. It's on performance and training and so forth. So it was quite a difficult one for them. But I think that is the problem, that independently United's squad is really bad and it needs a lot of work. And that's why injuries hurt them a lot more. It's as simple as that. Yeah. If you've got the right players that are back up, then you're all right.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Sportsman YouTube channel. Make sure you check out Statman Dave and CityXtra. There's plenty of great content on their channels, both on Twitter, YouTube. Make sure you get involved. Get in the comments down below. Speak to us about the England squad. Get your predictions in for the Manchester derby. And make sure you're back next time. Cheers.